Okay, well, Alex, welcome. We're super excited to have you joining us here in class. Um, One question we want to just get into to kind of kick things off is, we think about e-commerce being super noisy. Thousands of brands can launch on Shopify. There's really no barriers to entry there. But Charm kind of promises to cut through that. What's the hardest question you actually help when you think about an investor or a brand or even a partner that needs to answer that they could maybe
Oh,
perhaps answer before?
yeah. I think that's a great question. And to give you kind of a little background, that was actually the whole reason we launched Charm, right? Because we saw this trend happening where not just thousands, but millions of new e-commerce brands were coming to market. We joke that someone or their mother launches a new cosmetics brand like every day. And as that happened, the world got super fragmented, whether it's beauty or apparel or pet goods. All these new brands emerged, and it was really hard to make sense of which were actually doing well, which were driving growth amongst consumers, which demographics they were penetrating, which were actually reaching a measurable scale versus kind of just this flash in the pan moment. And so what we set out to do was try to first index all these brands, right? Figure out who these brands were. And then second, figure out a consistent way to measure them so that we can provide our customers insight into, which brands they should be caring about. And to answer your question, we serve a few different types of customers today. We serve large retailers that may be operating marketplaces or maybe operating brick and mortar stores, and they're looking for brands and using our data to drive merchandising decisions, like what brands they should be bringing into their stores or online. And we serve in big investors, right? Private equity, venture capital firms that invest in consumer brand. And each of those profiles, what they're looking for is quite different. So if we're thinking about, a marketplace, for example, they actually don't care that a brand might be, flaming out in a few months because they're not taking any inventory risk. They can see a trend happening in a brand. That brand's super hot for the next 60 days. They can put that brand on their marketplace. That brand is handling all the drop shipping directly to the consumer. They're capitalizing on the fact that that brand is super popular. And in 60 days, their hands are washed of it and they're done. They're moving on to the next trend. And I'm calling that out because I think it's really different based on who the customer is. If you're an investor, very, very different kind of ideology there, right? You're not going to be investing $100 million into a brand that you think there's a risk that that's going to be, in 60 days, that brand's going to be going away. And the way that we kind of solve this is we track a whole different, a very diverse set of metrics. Some of these are around, follower growth, for example, across Instagram, Facebook, TikTok. And this helps you understand how quickly is this brand gaining traction, right? But that doesn't really give you a sense of the overall magnitude of the brand relative to its category. But we track that as well. And so with the two components in each of the metric areas that we call them channels that we're measuring, you really get a sense of not just the trajectory of the brand, but also its relative size within that category. And so if you're an investor, for example, you use our different scoring systems and filters to toggle to find kind of that sweet spot based on your investment criteria to understand what's important to you. If you're a brick and mortar retailer, right, you may be looking at metrics like, does this brand already sell in other retailers? We track that today. So you can look at other, how big is their resale distribution as a part of their overall growth. That's a really good indicator for, what retailers describe to us as like their retail readiness, right? Because
Mm.
you don't want to, if you're, a big department store, be the one to take a bet on this like, super hot new social brand. You're not always going to be the one to take that first bet. And so I think it's providing this really wide array and diverse set of metrics that measure not only kind of the growth trajectory, but also the magnitude and penetration within a category. And then overlaying some, kind of fixed firmographic data as well. So we have things like, has this brand received funding? How many employees do they have? How has that been evolving over the past year or 2 years, right? And these tend to give you some more kind of like grounded facts that this isn't some guy in his garage that launched, a t-shirt brand that in 30 days he may decide to abandon ship because no one is buying his t-shirts anymore. And this is like a real business that you feel comfortable, conducting commercials with.
Wonderful. Well, there's no better way to understand this stuff than actually see it in action. So if we want to kind of maybe pop the hood and see how the platform works, let's say we have a trending TikTok fashion brand or healthcare space or something like that. So just given that simple prompt, can you just kind of maybe share your screen and walk us through how you would maybe go out looking at what's possible given some of the data you have?
Yeah, for sure. So we have two distinct data sets here at Charm. The first, and can you see my screen okay?
Yes.
The first is measuring every direct-to-consumer brand in the world. We track about 5 million of them in total. And the second measures every product being sold on TikTok Shop. So starting on the direct-to-consumer side, right? If we take that beauty brand example, let's say we're an investor in beauty, right? We can select beauty as our category in the US. We'll see all those beauty brands and we can sort them by either growth, so their relative growth score or how fast they're growing based on all of the metrics in Charm. We've created these machine learning models that normalize those disparate signals into one and create this calculated score representative of each brand's growth. And then the other is the success or how big they are relative to the other brands in the category. And then you could take any one of these brands, like Touchland, for example, right, and see their overall stats, but also their performance at a channel level, and then start to go deeper as you do your analysis. So maybe you care about, how they're trending on social, not only in terms of their overall audience size on Instagram, Facebook, or TikTok, but also their engagement, which is very important, right? Like, is their audience actually engaging with the content they're putting out? Or understanding who their audience actually is from a demographics perspective. Or is it male, female? What are the age and gender cohorts, right, within specific buckets? Retailers care a lot about what is the distribution of where that audience is located. When they're thinking, especially about a brick and mortar strategy for a particular D2C brand, they want to make sure that that brand has a strong penetration in retail, in metropolitan areas where they have a retail presence that they're going to be bringing that brand in. And we work with some retailers that actually use this as part of their distribution strategy to say, look, this brand is going to be a great fit for our customers, but let's start with them in these locations because that brand already has high awareness there, right? Understanding overall, what is the distribution of price points this brand sells at? Am I attracting a premium consumer or a lower cost consumer? I want to make sure that the brand's products are representative of that. And then that point I mentioned earlier of where else that brand is sold online and how much growth has there been in that distribution, and is it sold on marketplaces like Amazon, for example? And we cover a lot of others. Another thing I think is really interesting is this funding data I mentioned. We track that and the employee count over time, right? So different ways to kind of qualify a brand and their overall performance in the market. And then ultimately we provide you the contact data to get in touch with the brand. So if you then, found out Touchland and you're an investor or you're a retailer and you want to get in touch with them, you can, get in touch with their CEO or whoever else in their business that is relevant to the role and what you're kind of trying to speak to them about.
And
And then
Alex,
on
could
the
you go back to really quick to traffic and ads?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, walk us through when you're seeing this. What jumps out to you when you look at some of these screenshots? Just as someone who's kind of an expert in the space, anything like if you're looking at this brand, maybe as an investor, for example, anything popping at you?
Yeah, so I think in general, right, that the nothing in particular stands out from a web traffic trends perspective for
Okay,
Touchland. I think that in some cases, what we'll see is that there was like a total level up in a brand's traffic, right? So they went
sure.
through a big growth period and now they're operating at a totally different scale. Here, it seems like they had that in a certain period and it's kind of declined in recent months. So it's
Yeah.
not as material here, right? If it had leveled out at these levels, I would be kind of more speaking speaking to that. And then on an advertising basis, I think it's really interesting. I believe they either got, acquired or there was some big news, and it looks like they made a big investment in advertising right before that happened. And that's pretty typical, right? And we see that in a lot of the campaign activations that brands are doing when they have, when they're leading up to either a big process they're running as a business or something like that.
Fascinating. So big ramps and then it kind of falls off, and you're looking for maybe the S curves, right? There's an exponential growth, maybe a plateaus, but you're feeling
Yeah.
comfortable. But if you see, a parabola where it goes up and it falls down,
There's
uh,
probably an event that they're working towards rather than indicative of a broader strategy shift. Or
yeah,
they're testing and learning. That can also be the case too.
yeah,
Although Touchland's a more mature brand, I would say that the testing and learning spikes are more indicative of emerging brands and earlier
mhm,
stage companies, right? Where they're
okay.
like, we need to figure out what the sweet spot is for us. Let's do a big test. Oh, wait, this actually was a huge waste of money. We didn't actually see the ROI we expected. Let's pull back. And then on, the TikTok shop side, and this is what we've given the class access to, we gave the beauty category, but so they can play around with it as related to the case they're working on. But here you track every product sold every single day on TikTok Shop and all the video content driving the sales of those products. And so if we go into the beauty category, right, we could see at a high level 1.5 billion in sales January through August in just the US. I mean, TikTok Shop has become absolutely massive. They just crossed 75 billion in GMV globally since
Wow.
inception. But then you can actually get into the shops themselves. So if you take like Tarte Cosmetics, for example, you can see, how much Tarte has done in sales over the time period, like January through August, 53.6 million, what their revenue trend looks like, their items sold trend. And also we have a model that estimates their advertising spend on TikTok Shop.
That's
And,
pretty
and
interesting. Now, really quick, how's it getting the video ad spin? Is that just basically it's built some sort of a correlation or?
yeah, great question. It's actually one of the most fast models I think we've developed. And so the way that it works is because we track all the video data and we know all of the videos tied to every product on TikTok, we know how many views on average every creator gets. And when we see a video that goes outside of the norm, our models can compare that to average views for that creator and average views for that category, like beauty or whatever. And then it determines, using machine learning, what is the probability that X percent of those views were driven by advertising? And do
Okay.
we see an ad tag? TikTok publishes CPA numbers, right? And so we're able to then take those CPA numbers and calculate what would it have cost to get that many additional impressions. And so we can actually back into a pretty reasonable, it's a pretty reasonable methodological approach to estimating exactly how much they're spending to capture that additional amount of eyeballs. And we can do this across every video, every product, every shop at a massive scale, and then start to see some really interesting trends like, which shops are very effective with advertising, which are less so, which creators tend to require less boosted exposure to drive higher impact. So it's pretty cool.
Definitely. Let's continue to kind of go through some of this, I think, which is fascinating
Yeah.
seeing some of these things pop up.
And then, down to a product level, how much they've sold of every product. So, their top selling SKU did 9.2 million out of their 53 million, but then they have a bunch of other products that have sold in the millions of dollars. And, I think that's pretty rare, especially on TikTok Shop. A lot of these shops that you see there have like one hero SKU that is contributing like 80+% of the sales volume. Here that it's actually pretty well distributed and indicative of this being a really powerful brand. And obviously Tarte is massive. They sell in in beauty retailers and others. And then I think where this gets really interesting, we don't have to go through every view here, but where this gets really interesting is looking at the video data itself. So because we track every video, we actually estimate how much revenue came from every video, how many views we know obviously got, and then that ad spend on a video level. So for Tarte Cosmetics, this is their top performing video was Kaylee Salitro, generated over 1 million in sales. And then it was for these two products. And then we can actually click in and see what that video was to understand from a content perspective what actually worked for that video that drove such an outsized impact for Tarte, right? And we can see that at a shop level. So you can monitor for your competitors to understand what content is working. We can see that at a category level. So, what overall videos for the category did really well. So, like this one by Jeffree Star was the second best in the category. You can see, what content that was and understand from a content strategy perspective what's working. But then you can also understand overall statistics around their creators, right? So, what are the top creators at an aggregate level across all the videos that Tarte is working with or in the beauty category, right? And that's really important because when you're thinking about what creators to partner with, especially on TikTok, it's really moved away from this celebrity driven, mass audience, ROI, like that's not where the ROI is anymore. I think especially on TikTok, the ROI really comes from effectively leveraging these smaller audiences and maximizing authenticity within these micro communities at a big scale. So if you take Tarte, they worked with 24,000 creators over this 8-month period. 24,000 creators. That's insane. They put out 133,000 videos and got almost 1.5 billion views. So, that is just a operational scale play. And we've seen that be the case where, on average, top shops across, especially beauty and health, are working with at least 5,000 creators at a given time to promote their products, to tap into these smaller communities and ecosystems. And that's what's driving the scale.
And on that, Alex, are you finding people are using this tool to identify kind of those micro or mini influencers, and then they're dumping all this data into another platform to do the outreach and then serving brand guidelines with it and all that? Or what's kind of that workflow? Because
Yeah,
24,000 creators is a lot. I'd be curious if you have any insights on, you know,
yeah, great question. So I think it's a mix, right? I think some are using it who are before they're even in their, optimization process. They're just thinking about, should I be on TikTok Shop, right? A lot of more established brands are seeing the success or hearing about the success that other brands are having, and they want to understand, like, what is the size of the prize? How big is the opportunity in the categories I play in? Right? Who's playing there today? What price points are consumers paying for products? Are my products even a fit there? Right? Like, how am I going to be able to be competitive? Is it the right ecosystem for me? So I think that's like on an earlier stage part of the process. And then I think later is, tactically, how do I win? Right? What promotions and bundling are my competitors doing within my direct subcategories? What creators should I be partnering with? And then from a workflow perspective, it's taking these lists and either passing them to your agency if they are a really big brand, they have an agency partner, or TikTok has outreach tools that they've built out through Seller Center. There's other tools out there where you can mass outreach creators. So they've kind of, there's different solutions that exist in the market for actually doing the outreach. But I think the big question first is, instead of spraying and praying, kind of who you should be going after that is going to yield the best results for you, because there's this, kind of right balance of the biggest audience is not going to be necessarily the best converting audience for you, right? And I think that's a really important trend that's happened. When I speak about this data, it's like it's not about finding the Kim Kardashian on TikTok Shop. Like that's not going to drive the most sales for you over time. It's about finding the right creators that appeal to your target audience. And even if that's a small scale, right? Finding 100 of those or 1,000 of those or 22,000 of those, right? And being able to penetrate at scale that way rather than trying to do like this big shot one person that's going to be super expensive.
talk to me a little bit about what you see. We have this kind of paradigm of the funnel. We connect with potential customers, we kind of warm them up, we convert them, then hopefully we retain our best customers, ones that throw off the best free cash flows. Talk to me a little bit about how you think about kind of the funnel and where, say, TikTok in this example with a beauty brand would kind of fit.
So it's really interesting. I think TikTok is very unique, unlike other social channels, because as a social commerce player, TikTok really impacts two stages of the funnel. It is on the surface level, TikTok Shop, a bottom of funnel, play, because you can actually make a purchase right there. But what's interesting is that actually the average net margin based on our estimations is only about 10% for the top 1,000 beauty and health products. And actually, about 22% of those top products are losing money on every sale. Reason they're doing that is because TikTok Shop, and I think arguably its bigger impact than as a bottom of funnel play, is that it's a top of funnel awareness driver.
Mhm.
And it drives a massive impact to sales on other channels. And I've seen this, in discussions with many brands that say, once I started selling on TikTok Shop, I saw a big spike in my sales on Amazon. I saw, a big spike in my sales in store at beauty retailers or mass market retailers. We partnered, I can show you just one quick slide that I think is really interesting that one brand shared with me that shows their TikTok shop sales compared to their Amazon sales, right, trended together over time. And you can see this perfect trend that their Amazon shop sales follow versus their TikTok shop sales. And he said that they found that it was a direct correlation whenever they pulled back investment in TikTok shop, that immediately their Amazon suffered. And even though Amazon was operating at a much bigger volume for them, right, they had to continue investing in TikTok Shop in order to keep driving that uplift in Amazon. And I think that, the more differentiated channels you have, the more you're going to see that. And the reason I think is still a little bit unknown because I don't think you get the opportunity as a brand to talk to every one of those consumers and ask them why they ended up purchasing on that channel and not that channel. But a lot of times people are more comfortable on Amazon, right, or in retail, but they first got familiar with the brand on TikTok, or they are already used to doing their shopping in a beauty retailer, and so they heard of the brand originally on a TikTok video, but then thought to actually buy it because they were in store. Like, it's hard to say what the thought process always is, but we do see that correlation very strongly, especially with the impact across channels.
And kudos to a brand to be tracking some of this stuff and seeing that sometimes these halo effects are a little bit hard to tease apart. But if you're not even looking at the data or capturing the data,
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think it's also, it's as a brand, especially when you're thinking of like a more legacy brand, I think it's often hard to stomach like we're losing money on this channel. Why should
right.
we keep it around? Right. And I think that is where data is so important. It's like, well, we need to be looking at the bigger picture here of what is the real impact that this is driving. And I think that a lot for many years, multi-touch attribution and all these kind of concepts were imaginary, right? Like they didn't really exist in the way that people wanted them to. And so it was really hard to make sense of what's really happening, right? When I run a TV ad and it's for a specific retail location and nothing happens there, like what is the impact of that? Or if like, what is the lift that I'm getting from a certain type of ad? I think as technologies around tracking have gotten more effective, that people are able to make more intelligent decision around the holistic performance. But I still think it's not, 100% there.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there's a lot of hopes and dreams around what AI machine learning can do for some of this. At the end of the day, there's still going to be some black holes we'll never be able to fully plug with attribution.
Totally.
Um, Talk to me a little about AI. How do you think about AI maybe in your product roadmap? How do you think AI with some of this data can inform a marketing team? How do you think about AI within Charm itself?
Yeah. So I would say we like to leverage it for its strengths and approach it in a very apprehensive way in many cases, right? So I'll kind of take you back to the very beginning. Charm 1.0, we kind of let the data collection run wild.
Mm,
What I mean by that is we designed the crawlers in the original iteration to say, basically follow any link you find online, have some probabilistic logic to figure out if what you're looking at is a brand, and then have another set of probabilistic logic to start pulling in data.
hmm
And what happened was the brand database grew very quickly. but as you would imagine it would, right? I mean, this is like basically how Google designed their crawlers. But the downside was that the data set got very dirty very, very fast. And so we went back to the drawing board, and because we were like, well, this doesn't make sense. We have 37 versions of the brand Clarins, and none of them actually have the correct data. And actually, this one is for this country and is missing these three things that are mapped to this one. Like, and this doesn't make any sense. And by the way, we don't know where any of this came from because the crawlers have just been running amok for, months, and they're just collecting what they think to collect and then trying to relate things on the back end. And so we kind of went back to the drawing board and we built in very strict monitoring around data provenance and understanding where every single data point comes from. And then built in very robust tooling around manual correction and the ability for our team to have like a human in the loop to clean data. And the reason I point that out is because I think that what these massive scale AI models like ChatGPT, like they're approaching a challenge, I should say, not a problem, but a challenge at such a massive scale that it's very difficult to say where you can implement something like a human in the loop, right? It's very difficult to understand like how do you even approach this without truly trying to just automate it all. I think the benefit of what we're doing is that we're trying to measure every brand in the world, but we're limiting it to just every brand in the world, right? And in a lot of ways, it is a limited ecosystem, and so we know like this is all we're trying to do, and so what that means is that over time, having a human in the loop enables us to consistently improve the quality of our data. Like if we see something that looks off. Right now, we can go back and in 2 seconds, this is something our head of data is super proud of. He brings it up all the time. He says, I can tell you in 2 seconds exactly where this data point came from, right? And that is really important because in order to create corrections and in order to be able to make improvements, you have to first understand like where was the source of data that
Yeah.
drove things down the wrong path. And so we've built a lot of that monitor in, and then giving our teams the ability, even if you're like a salesperson or, it doesn't matter what your role is, you can go in into our manual correction tools and submit a fix and say, actually, this brand, we're missing their Instagram account, or we have this, this handle for them on TikTok, and it's actually not correct. They've changed their handle, or this brand is, no longer operating under that, other alias or whatever. And having those little fixes allow us to make our crawling system smarter to learn from the changes we're making ourselves and also allow us to identify where in the original data collection processes are we going, are things maybe going wrong. And I think that's really, really important. Like we've really designed it in a way to think about how do we make the best data set for the future, not just the biggest data set for today. And then the other piece is, I think, and this pertains to models in general, it's really important as a consumer of a model, and we tell our customers this all the time, to make sure you have a good understanding of what it is that that model is actually telling you and what it's measuring, right? So like we in our D2C platform, we have these growth and success scores. We're measuring very specific set of criteria around a brand's performance. We are not measuring how well that beauty brand is selling on the shelves of Sephora. And so when somebody comes to us and says, well, your growth score is saying it's a 55, but I know that it's one of Sephora's top sellers, I'm like, that's great, but that's actually not what we're measuring in our growth score. And so it's really difficult for, us to, it can't be everything for everybody, right?
Right.
But I
Yeah.
think if you're a customer or you're a user, your first step needs to be understanding what is it that this is actually measuring, and then how do I make the most out of that? And educating users is it's on us, obviously, and our responsibility, but that's really the first thing that we try to do with everyone is really educate them about how we've designed these models, what they measure, and why it's important that they work the way they do, and what they don't do, right? So that
Right.
they can use them most effectively for their own work. And I think that's the case for any model you're using for anything, right? To understand its limitations, understand its drawbacks, and ultimately try to get the most out of it for your use case while understanding, what it can and cannot do.
Yeah, the old joke to a person with a hammer, everything looks like a nail. But I think most
Exactly.
people get a little obsessed, in my experience, sometimes with the hammer, and instead, like, are we building a cathedral? Are we building a house?
Yeah.
What are we building? And like, what is the hammer even the right tool to use to build that? So,
Yeah.
um,
I mean, I think that's definitely to a certain extent happened with ChatGPT, right? I mean, I see it people on our team and in other in areas of my personal life, like their first instinct is now I have to go to ChatGPT. And I'm like,
right.
well, wait a second. Like before you go to ChatGPT, can we like just think about it for 1 second? And then, perhaps we should still go to ChatGPT, but maybe we can approach it then from a slightly smarter perspective than just like jumping to ChatGPT, right? I'm a little nervous about where the world is heading with that type of kind of logical sequencing.
Yeah, we spend a lot of time unpacking first principles. Should we even advertise on Instagram? Let alone how do we pick the right creative? Like,
Yeah.
is that even a viable channel? If we're selling B2B enterprise software sales or something like that, is that where we would even start? Maybe,
Great
LinkedIn or
question.
something, maybe an old school print campaign, even, who knows? But I think that's a big one. Um, so to kind of wrap up here, thinking about kind of lessons for future leaders sitting today, if you're kind of armed with Charm and these AI tools, access to all this massive data, what's kind of a contrarian way you'd use that stack if you're kind of either launching a company or being brought in to lead a company, maybe in the healthcare space or a similar one where this maps over to?
Yeah, I think there's this, tendency for people to always want to analyze the top performers. I
Mm,
see this really often.
fathead, yes, yeah,
Like, I want to see who's doing the best. Like, it is so interesting to me. Like, they're doing the best. They have the most revenue. I want to see what they're doing. I want to see what they're doing.
yes,
And I always find it really interesting to not look at who's doing the best, but to look at who's doing uniquely well under certain circumstances or certain criteria. And, one of the roles we're hiring for now is a research analyst. And their kind of responsibility is going to be focusing on the data and doing data analysis from the perspective of generating these, very unique types of insights on what's standing out to us, but not in terms of who's growing the fastest or who's the biggest, but who's like doing a lot with a little, or who's,
yeah,
managing to, have very even distribution across a large set of different SKUs. Like we don't see that happen very often.
that's very
Or,
rare. Yeah,
given that we know that almost all the successful shops are using a large scale of creators, I would love to know, well, which are the ones that have done really well not using a large scale of creators? What are they doing from a content perspective, right? Or which are the ones that have, been able to be really successful at an oversized price point relative to their category? What makes them unique or able to penetrate at that price point? So my point in this is like, I would think about before replicating success based on who the biggest is, think about who's doing things in a unique way, particularly well, and try to approach a data set from that perspective. One of the things I definitely wish I had more time to do personally is play with the data in that way and really try to cut it and analyze that stuff. Because I'm a data nerd. I love it when I find insights like that.
you sort of see a world with a large language model across the top of this, where it's going to be pretty
Totally.
fascinating. And the as we say, gold in the couch cushions,
Yeah.
where there's massive. Wow, it's not servicing a massive amount of growth yet, but look at what it's doing in despite some of these other lack of resources,
Or
perhaps.
it's not getting massive growth, but that could be for totally different reasons. Maybe they
Yeah.
don't have the means to maintain the inventory levels they need, right?
Yes.
Or,
Yes.
or maybe they're, supply constrained because what they're selling actually has some, other geopolitical impact. Like they can't get enough of the material for it. Like it has nothing to do with how much they would sell of it, right? Like there's so many other factors. But I think the first question is like, what patterns are you trying to identify that are really going to stand out to you?
Definitely. Two questions to wrap up here. How do you handle your own screen time working in this space? Do you find yourself on social and on your phone all the time? Do you have like personal like rules for yourself where you can't touch it after 7 o'clock at night? Or how do you think about kind of
Yeah.
controlling, as we joke about, the cigarettes that we all carry around in our pockets these days?
That's a good question. I would say that my social exposure is pretty limited. Um, I don't think that it's my rules as much as my wife's rules. She's very, very strict about that, especially now that we have a baby, where, we have a zero screens policy in the presence of the baby. And so anytime we're near the baby, we don't use phones, no TV on, which I think is a great, great habit for ourselves as much as for him.
Yes.
But also, I have kind of found myself shift to what I look for in social in recent years. When I was younger, it was a lot more what are my friends doing and a lot more kind of that traditional social element to it. And I think now it's a lot more using it as my news kind of channel, right? And a lot more on X and, following people whose perspectives I'm interested in and using that as kind of my source of information rather than as a traditional, entertainment source.
Yeah. And final question. What do you think investors, founders, students would ask you about the e-commerce data, but they almost never do?
Um, that's a good one. I think that what what I wish they would ask is, how would I recommend they approach their workflows? Um, I think that for most customers, I wouldn't say all customers, but most customers tend to approach analysis with a preconceived notion of what it is that they're looking for. And I think that, and how to get there. And I think the most successful customers I've worked with, and not just at Charm, but I've been in e-commerce data my whole career now, over a decade. And before this, when I was at SimilarWeb too, it's the most successful customers were the ones that were very open about what they were trying to understand and collaborated with you as the expert in the data to uncover those truths or nuggets for them. And I think that that is like a big differentiator, is just like, how should I be thinking about this using your data, right? What are the pitfalls? What are the strengths? Or should I not be doing this analysis using your data at all?
Yeah, no, I think we get back to first principle.
Yeah,
Is this the right tool and what are we trying to solve? And then not trying to fit an answer to something maybe not in the data or able to
exactly.
be known as well.
Exactly.
Alex, if people want to get in touch with you and follow up, where's the best way to kind of follow along?
Alex at charm.io.
Wonderful. Thank you again for making time to chat with us. We're excited to have you in class and kind of unpacking some of these things and working with the tool. And thank you again for providing the opportunity for the students to mess around with some of these cutting edge
My pleasure. My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
experiences. Excellent.